Welcome to the other side with Paranormal M. Dive into the unknown with us as we explore the paranormal. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for a dose of the supernatural in your inbox. 2 weeks of hell. Every summer, my grandparents would go on a cruise. They had both worked incredibly hard their entire lives, and in retirement, would treat themselves to a couple of holidays a year. They had a lovely home that I'd spend every Saturday night at as a child, and every summer, when they went on their cruise, they would ask me to stay and look after the dog. I loved it. I was in my early 20s and still lived at home with my parents. This was a chance for a bit of independence, to have the house to myself. I'd done it for a few years up until this point, and instead of throwing parties with my friends, which I'd previously done, I was looking forward to spending some time with my girlfriend and chilling out. My grandparents filled the fridge with my favorite foods, always left me a bit of spending money. My granddad was always leave me a crate of beer in the garage. Awesome. The first night, me and my then girlfriend didn't do anything special. We loved the freedom and loved that we were going to get to spend a full 2 weeks together by ourselves. We watched a movie and decided we would go to bed. While she was in the bathroom, all the power cut in the house. Nothing out of the ordinary. Went to the kitchen, found the switch, and boom, there was light. We got in bed, put the telly on. I used to not be able to sleep without the TV on. I'll explain more later. I went to sleep. I remember waking up and there was screaming coming from the TV. I looked at the dressing table clock and saw that the time was 3:33. Incredibly cliche, I know, but true. I immediately laughed it off and dozed back to sleep. The next day we both went to work. Both returned to my grandparents' house in the early evening. We chilled out doing what young couples do and decided it was time to go to bed. Before I went to bed, though, I'd always let Bonnie out, my grandparents' beautiful dog, to go out and do her business on the back garden. My grandparents' back door led onto a conservatory, which then led onto a patio, which then led onto the back garden. I unlocked the back door, turned on the lights to the conservatory and patio, and moved towards the conservatory door. Bonnie didn't move from the back door. After a bit of convincing with rich tea biscuits, I managed to convince her to the conservatory. There was no way I wasn't letting her out and having to scrape up dog poop in the following morning. I unlocked the conservatory door onto the patio. Before I had a chance to fully open the door, there was a large thud that came from the conservatory window on my right. I stood frozen for what felt like an hour. I calmly closed the door, stood in shock, wondering what it could be. I wasn't scared at this point, just incredibly startled. I looked down at Bonnie, who was staring up at me. Decided it would be fine if she did her business in the house that night. Nasty. I went to bed with my heart still pounding, but didn't mention it to my girlfriend. I awoke again the next night with someone on the television screaming, 3:33. At 3:33, not screaming 3:33. The next day was my day off from work. My girlfriend was working, though. I had the house to myself. I had nothing special planned, and I was just going to chill out and play some PlayStation. I'd pretty much shrugged off the thud ordeal in the conservatory from the night before. Bonnie hadn't left any presents for me, and she did run the fastest I've ever seen her run out into the back garden when I opened the doors that morning. I couldn't stop thinking about being woken up at 3:33 for 2 consecutive nights. I wondered what the consequences of it happening 3 times might be. Laughed it off again and tried to enjoy the rest of my day off. Mid-afternoon, I received a phone call from my girlfriend telling me that her car had broken down while at work. This was a huge bummer, because we lived over 70 miles apart, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to see her for a while until it was fixed. She apologized that she wouldn't be able to stay with me while I was dog sitting, but I told her not to be daft, and that we'll see each other again as soon as possible. That afternoon I went for a shower. I was just lathering myself up when I heard the phone ring. I let it ring knowing that if it's important, it'll go to the answering machine and I can ring them back. The ringing stopped and immediately began once again. I thought that it must be important, so I ran out of the shower, suds and all, to grab the phone. When I answered, no one was there, just silence. No dial tone. Someone was on the line, but not talking. I must have said hello a dozen times before the line cut dead. The second it did, the doorbell rang. Now I was in a precarious position. I'd ran out the shower full-blown naked to answer the phone and not taken a towel with me. The phone I'd answered was in the kitchen, by the front door, and it was at the end of the hallway on my right. I sheepishly stuck my head around the corner toward the front door to see who it was. There was no one there. Only a couple seconds had passed by, but whoever had rang the doorbell had already gone. I wasn't scared. I wasn't concerned, as it was broad daylight. I got back in the shower, and within a minute, the phone and the doorbell were ringing at the same time. I immediately got out of the shower, wrapped myself in a towel this time, headed for the door. No one was there yet again. The phone had stopped ringing the second I left the shower. I carried on with the rest of my day, and that night I didn't wake up at all, much to my relief. The next day I was in the living room watching television. I was sat in my granddad's electric reclining chair. It was a comfy beast. It was placed in the far left corner of the living room with the TV in the far right. On the left of the chair was the window looking out toward the street. The window was huge. It was actually 3 separate windows with a beautiful pattern running through all 3. While I was watching television, the doorbell rang. This was quite strange, as my grandparents lived in the corner of a cul-de-sac, and if anybody had driven or walked to the door, I would have seen them. I didn't think much of it, as I must have been engrossed in whatever rubbish I'd been watching. Bonnie was up on all 4s in the hallway, staring at the door. I thought that maybe it was my auntie making sure I'd not burned the house down. When I got to the door, no one was there. Again. Now I was becoming a little bit more distressed, and being myself was making it worse. I thought that maybe it was burglars scoping the place out, seeing if anyone was home. That night, just before bed, I went to let Bonnie out, opened the back door, turned on the lights to the conservatory and patio, and opened the conservatory door. To my horror, on the patio was a mangled bird. It had no head, and the left side of its body had been torn off by something. What shocked me the most was that it was still walking about. I didn't know what to do, so I rang my girlfriend. I was explaining to her what I'd seen. When I looked back onto the patio, the bird had gone. I went outside to check to see if I could find it, but it had buggered off like it was never there. I decided that Bonnie could do her business in the house again if she must. Nasty. At this point, it was all becoming a little bit too much for me. I spoke to my auntie and asked if my cousin and his girlfriend wanted dog sit instead. I explained that my girlfriend couldn't stay anymore anyway, and that they'd probably appreciate the time alone. They obviously jumped at the chance. Cowardice, I know. That night I went home and thought that it would have now all been over. I was wrong, dead wrong. A few days after I'd got back into my comfort zone and was just sat watching TV in my bedroom, when out of nowhere there were 2 loud strums on my acoustic guitar. I sat there in disbelief for a moment, but then decided I'd had enough. I asked whoever did it to do it again. The hairs on my arms rose with anticipation and fear. I asked multiple times. Luckily, nothing. I decided it's probably best I went downstairs where my sister and Mom were. As I went downstairs, I heard the guitar fall over. Couldn't bring myself to tell them what had happened for fear of them thinking I'm nuts. Another few days had gone by, and at this point I was exhausted. Even though nothing serious had happened and I'd not seen anything, I felt like I was going crazy. I decided it's probably best that I have an early night. I put the television on for background noise and faced the wall. Within seconds, I heard my television shut off, followed by heavy breathing. I laid with my eyes shut, terrified, as I heard the breathing get closer. It was deliberate and calculated. Each step it got closer, the louder the breathing got. I was frozen in fright. As it approached the bed, I could feel its breath on the back of my head. Every hair on my body stood up as I could feel whatever it was lurking over my body. A few agonizing silent seconds passed, followed by a gigantic roar in my ear. I jumped to my feet, laid down position. I don't think I'll ever be able to do it again. I stood there breathless, pouring in sweat. I was absolutely terrified. I looked at my clock, and I saw that it was 2:15 in the morning. I'd gone to sleep around 9-ish. What felt like seconds had actually been hours. Scared to go back to sleep, I tiptoed downstairs not to wake anyone. But to my surprise, all the lights were on. I walked into the living room, and my mom was awake having a cigarette. I asked what she was doing up so late. She explained to me that she had just had a horrible dream in which me, my sister, her, and my stepdad all awoke in the middle of the night because things were floating around the house. We'd somehow all gained telekinetic powers and can control everything within the house. I laughed along as she explained the ludicrous dream until she had got to the end. At the end of the dream, we were all downstairs dumbfounded as to what was going off around us. Then we all heard a terrifying roar come from the upstairs. We crept as a family up the stairs, following the sounds from above. As we got to the top, it was apparent that the sounds were coming from my room. We went in together and all gasped as we saw a demonic hand open the hatch to the attic. That's when she woke up, and the dream ended. I didn't share my dream. Later that morning, I became so tired that I could resist sleep no longer. Got back into bed, looking at the hatch that led to the attic. I dreamt that something was trying to pull me out of bed by my feet, and when I woke the next morning, my right foot was covered in scratches. The events had really begun to take a toll on my mental well-being. I daren't sleep, and I didn't want to be left alone. I dreaded coming home from work. But over another few more days without incident, I was starting to feel a bit better and less like a nutter. I was at home with my mom playing PlayStation in my room when my mom asked if I wanted anything from the shop. I told her I was fine. I didn't think anything of it when she left. The second she left, there was a loud bang that came from her room. At this point, I'd had enough. Just like when my guitar had played, I encouraged it to do it again. This time, it immediately responded with 2 large bangs. I rose up from my chair, walked into the landing where all the bedrooms met. I stood there staring intently into my mother's bedroom. It was pitch black. I asked it to do it again. This time, nothing. I walked into her room and turned on her light to see books laid out across the floor. Obviously the cause of the noises I'd heard. I stood in the middle of the room and dared them to do it again. A madman talking to himself in his parents' bedroom. Nothing. I'd had my fill of whatever had been happening to me, decided that enough was enough. I told them exactly what I thought of them, using every expletive that I could think of. Some manic, crazed lunatic screaming at the abyss, telling them all to fuck right off. A few minutes later, my mother came back from the shop. I went downstairs and explained everything that I'd gone through over the last couple of weeks. She patiently listened to me, and it felt great to get this nightmarish burden off of my chest. When I finished, she told me that her, my stepdad, and sister had always feared my bedroom. It's always made them feel uneasy to enter when I'm not there. She also told me a story. It was while I was at my grandparents'. Her and my stepdad had had an argument, so my dad had decided to sleep in my bed, but he hurriedly ran back to their room as something had pushed him while he was trying to sleep. She also told me that the reason I slept with the TV on is when I was a child. My actual dad passed away. My granddad told me that my dad would come to visit me while I was sleeping. Instead of this being comforting, though, it terrified me, so I could never sleep in the dark again. Since that day, I've never had any more experiences. I still regularly visit my grandparents at their home, and they're still going strong in their 80s. I check back and just as much with the, parentos. Nice. My room is exactly the same as when I left, and no one dare enter when I'm not there. I was surprised that when I moved out years ago that my sister never took it, because her bedroom was tiny, but the unnerving presence feels towards it was too much for her. Weird Occurrences in My Home, Part 1. I've had a lot of people asking me about my family's funeral home that I live in, and if anything scary has happened. I actually have a lot of stories. This house is definitely haunted, but I think it has more to do with the house's history. It was a very large boarding house before my dad had bought it. There are a lot of doors because of that, and my bedroom door even still has a number on it from when it was. I have so many stories I don't even know where to start. All of them revolved around my older daughter, who seemed to be the focus of a lot of activity. I'll start with one that's more recent. One day we heard a crash above us from the attic that sounded like a piano being dropped. My husband was bathing our child, so I got my dad, who's working, and we went upstairs. When we got up there, we didn't see anything that fell. We did, however, find a wooden plank that was nailed in the middle, the size of a street sign. On the plank, there were initials written in fresh chalk. Never had seen it before, and neither had my dad. That was one of the very first incidents. So last year I was pregnant, having a new baby in December, and I'd been scouring the attic for my newborn clothes for the first. I was up there 2 days prior, searching all over, including this spot. I went out that afternoon and sent my husband up there to find stuff. And when I got home, went up to talk to him, and he showed me this handmade wooden cross thing. It was hanging from the board with the initials on it from a dog leash. I was so freaked out because I know for a fact that it was not there the other day. I would have hit my head on it. I texted my brother who works at the funeral home if he had been up there, and only entrance to the attic is in my apartment. He insisted that he had not been up there, but that he did make the cross out of Lincoln logs when he was a kid. So I know who made it, but had no idea why it was all of a sudden hanging there in plain sight. My husband really thought someone was messing with us, or I just didn't see it the other day. But there's no way in hell I didn't see it hanging at eye level. He took it down, swung it back over, just kind of dangling down. My brother is freaked out now too because he made the cross. But he didn't attach the dog leash. We don't even have a dog. The leash was most likely for my brother's girlfriend's dog when they lived there, but I'd never even seen it. It was so creepy and I never figured out what it was. Weird Happenings in My Home, Part 2. So a lot of my paranormal experiences have involved my daughter, who's now 7. It slowed down a lot for a few years, but actually started up again a lot more when I was pregnant with my second last year. But there were several really creepy things my daughter said. These are all from when she was between 2 and 3 because she was talking but still very young. One night, I was sitting on her bed, tucking her in. We had the lights out, but a pretty bright nightlight. I was singing to her like I do every single night. That's nice. All of a sudden, she pulls the blanket up to her face and had a weird look. She then says to me, "Mommy, the man said to stop singing." I was thinking, what? She was now hiding underneath the covers and was actually really scared, so I said, "Who said that, baby?" She pointed over and said, "The man over there doesn't like it." I'm not gonna lie, I'm totally embarrassed that I'm a shit mom, apparently, but I tucked her in, left real quick. I felt bad, but I wasn't gonna scare her more. She was okay when I left. She had said so many weird things. Once she said to me, "My friend Ida comes visit me at night. She has long black hair and a black dress and black shoes." I asked her, "Oh, really? Does she live here or just come to visit?" And she said that she just comes in to visit her. She was not even 3. I'd never spoken of anyone named Ida ever. Another time she told me there was an owl in her closet at night that made noise, and also told me that her little birdhouse that she had hanging in her room had someone in it that talked to her. There was a time at my parents' house we were sitting at the dining room table, and it's like in a sort of alcove type area with windows all around facing just all woods. All of a sudden she stops in her high chair and gets super serious and says, "Shh, everyone be quiet, there's a ghost in the trees," and pointed outside. It was terrifying. She was always talking to someone in a room and always saying weird things that she shouldn't know. The craziest one will be in part 3 with a picture attached. Weird Happenings in My Home, Part 3. Now I want to be clear, even though my house is definitely haunted, I don't feel threatened. It's just there. My husband and I to this day feel ice-cold movement that comes and goes. We hear banging at night and we hear voices. We've had things go missing. I'll be in bed and think that somebody came in when they didn't, or something will hit the bed when I'm alone. We also have a ghost cat who jumps on our bed and has even touched us. But this particular event happened 6 years ago. My daughter was supposed to be napping. She was in her crib and I was laying down in my bedroom with the video baby monitor. I kept checking it because she was unusually riled up and talking and laughing and just wouldn't go to sleep. But she wasn't crying at least, so I let her be. A few minutes later I picked up the monitor to check, and when I picked it up I thought she was sitting on the right side of the crib. Then a second later I realized that she's standing to the left. So what the fuck is that sitting on the right? It was clearly a baby. I watched it on the monitor and it moved its head a few times, which scared the shit out of me. I took a picture of the screen for proof. Thank God. And you can see what I caught. I went in a few minutes later after calming down and she was laying down. There were no stuffed animals of any kind in there. I checked. There was not a cross connection with another monitor because it's one that had absolutely no internet hookups. Just a camera and a hand screen. It was so insane. I actually had a ghost hunting group ask to come to my house, but I declined. Really didn't want to know, or make it worse. It wasn't hurting anyone, at least, interestingly enough, too. My dad said that the people who lived here before it became a boarding house. It was like a family that had several kids, and apparently they had maids who lived in the attic. Just so many crazy things that have happened, but this one was so scary. When the adults are gone, the spooks come out. This is an ongoing thing right now in the house I live in. My family moved into the house in early April. My mother and her friend were just at the house before my brother and I moved in. When my mother's friend was going outside to smoke, he saw a shadow near this metal sheet that we have there. She told my mother, but she thought he was just messing with her. Skip a couple of weeks, I was home alone and I kept hearing noises, which was common because, well, it's a tree branch on the roof above my room. But then I start hearing talking. I then pull out my phone to record and I catch someone saying hello. It was normal for neighbors to come over and talk, but this was 2 a.m. I still check the porch for people, but there's nothing. I hear things coming from my brother's room. We have a connected bathroom, so I step out of my room and see that his door is closed. I go in the restroom, swing open the door, and I do see his door is open, so I sweep the house for people. I end up not finding anyone. When my mom comes home a week later, I go to show her the video, but I must have deleted it because it wasn't there. She said that she didn't believe me, but still had her friend, who was a priest, come by and bless the house. Another week goes by. My brother is back, and I see him looking down the hall, and I tell him, "Yeah, I keep thinking I see someone there too." He agrees with me, and he thinks he sees someone. Then another week, my sister comes over. It's about 9 p.m., so I'm just about to go to sleep. I hear a knocking, but I just close my eyes and I try to sleep. But my brother comes in the room and says sister's in the bathroom, freaking out. I go and ask her if she heard the knock too. She replies with, "That wasn't y'all messing with me. It was knocking on the bathroom door." She got scared and began crying. She calls out to Mom and told her what happened. She says that she'd been drinking, so can't drive home. I grab my dad's knife, searched the house, then the yard. Nobody was there, and all the doors had been locked. Historic homes always equal ghosts. So back when I was in college, I dated a guy whose childhood home was very close to the university we both attended. Now, this house is part of a historical home district in the South where if a home is of a certain age, you're not allowed to change it or destroy it. Any updates must be approved by the city and retain the historical integrity of the home. All of this to say that this house was essentially almost the exact same since it was built in the 1800s. Now, we would often hang out at this house to visit family and would sometimes stay over to keep his dad company. Knowing I love ghosts and a good history lesson, he'd informed me that growing up, the family had seen ghostly apparitions and experienced a few things themselves. So before I start my story, I will explain a few of the others from their perspective. The way the home was built, there was like the kitchen and living space downstairs and the master bedroom. There was a second story that involved a tiny wooden staircase that led into a long hallway with the bedroom to the left and at the top of the stairs, and a bedroom almost directly in front of the stairway exit, and then a bedroom to the right at the far end of the hallway. The bedroom on the far right was mostly used for storage, and that's it. He informed me that he and his sister would sometimes see an apparition in this room of a woman in the 1800s fashion clothing, hair in a bun, full-bottom petticoat, etc. She would always be looking out longingly through the window in the bedroom. If approached, she would always disappear. The second story was one that my ex and his mother had experienced. His mother unfortunately passed away from an illness, and at this time she was progressively getting sicker. I say this because, as some people say, the closer you are to birth or death, the easier for you to see or relate to spirits. Anyways, the ex was stopping by his home to pick up some items and just run in and out. He had parked his car in the driveway that was visible from the windows when in the sitting room. He ran in, grabbed his stuff, saw his mother in the sitting room, and said hello. He made it to his car with his items and got back in when his mother called him on his phone, asking him, "Why didn't you tell me that you had a guest with you? You should know better than to not introduce a guest when you bring them over. It's the South, traditions and such." He was confused and had no idea what she was talking about. He asked her back, "What do you mean? It's just me here." To which she replied, "No, there's a girl sitting in your passenger seat. I can see her right now." To which he then noped the hell out of his vehicle and went back inside. There was also always random bangs and noises that one always just chalks up to living in an old house. However, whenever we would stay over, I would always have the same dream of what looked like someone in like a shape of a man, looked like a black shadow always standing at the edge of our bed. Now, this is the real incident I experienced on my own. One day when I was attending class, I'd realized I'd forgotten to print out something for a presentation, as I'd mentioned his house was close by the school. I checked with him to see if it was okay if I ran back to his dad's home and printed off my assignment there. He said that there was no issue and that his dad was actually in business meeting, so he wouldn't even be home, so I wasn't bothering anyone. I rushed over to the house, up the stairs to the bedroom, which had the printer in it. It happened to close the bedroom door for some reason and got to the laptop and began trying to find the assignment and print it out. While I was sitting and waiting on my printout, I began to hear someone walking downstairs. I was confused as no one should be home, so I'd called my at the time boyfriend and asked if he was home. He told me no, that he was on the way to class. I asked if his dad maybe came home, to which he replied his dad was just going into a meeting. He had just talked to him. As we were on the phone, I heard the noise from downstairs begin to head in my direction. I heard footsteps clearly stomping up the stairs, and now I got scared, but possibly thinking somebody had broken into the home. I just happened to be there. I told my boyfriend to stay on the phone with me. I heard the footsteps get to the top of the hallway and all of a sudden stop outside the door of the room I was in. I freaked out, ready to run or attack, one of the two. I opened the door and no one was standing there. Absolutely no one was in the house. I then grabbed my assignment and have probably never ran so fast in my life. House hunting ghost. During our first home search, we looked at a lot of homes. We thought we wanted a particular style of home. We focused on those type of homes anyway. Our realtor found one in the northern suburb in our town. The day arrived for the showing. The realtor opened the door and the house was empty. A few pieces of furniture remained. We did the standard tour, following her from room to room. The master bedroom was on the first floor, and it had Berber carpet, and it was kind of snagged and messed up. My husband and the realtor went back down the hall to the great room. As I continued to look at the carpet, I was bent down looking at the carpet. I saw the realtor go past the doorway and through the door to the basement. I stood up to follow her down the stairs, and the lady had short black hair, a tan coat, and gold earrings. Just as I was starting to go down to the basement, I realized that my husband and the realtor were upstairs. During this moment, I took my eyes off the lady and stopped. I did not proceed down the stairs. When I looked down the stairs, the lady had turned the corner. The realtor and my husband came down the stairs, saying the basement was next. The realtor went down the stairs. I followed, looking at the realtor. Her hair was different, and her coat was not the same, and no earrings. The basement was empty. All the lights were on. No one was down there. I was spooked. That had to be a prior owner. I faked a headache and called off the next showing. When we left the house, I saw the lady looking out the window at us. I told my husband what happened. They said the realtor told him the owner had passed away. I knew the lady had died in that home. My tribes, I'm dying in Mississippi Choctaw. I believe you cannot live in a home where somebody died. The ghost was not malevolent, but I feel she was letting me know that she was present. Shapeshifters are relative. My sister married a guy who was in law enforcement. During the beginning years of his career, they were posted to various small towns. One town was small, and so to attract candidates, they offered housing in a complex. This apartment complex was on the edge of this town. The complex was surrounded by farmlands and some woods. This complex had apartments for the elderly and some subsidized apartments. They were very brightly lit and relatively safe for these residents. Each apartment had a panic button. This town was so small they had no EMS. The cops came first, and the nearest town would send a squad, like 15 minutes away. My sister just had her first child. This particular night, she was having a tough time getting the baby situated. The lights in the bedroom was off, and only a hallway light was on. She was walking with the baby, and finally, the baby drifted off to sleep. As she was bending over to put the baby in the bassinet, her eyes saw two red eyes staring at her. The windows closed, the curtains pulled back, and only the shears down. My sister walked over and moved the curtains to see a face. The face was a man's face with lots of hair. Two large, unblinking red eyes just looked straight ahead. My sister stumbled backwards and hit the panic button. She got the baby and went to the front room. Her husband was on night shift duty. He rushed back as he pulled up to the apartment, and he saw it. First it looked like a man, but full of hair. He turned around and dropped to all fours. Took off to the farmlands. My brother-in-law chased it on foot. As he's on its tail, several people rushed up saying in Spanish, "Wolfman." They had been working on farm equipment in the garage and an outbuilding and bordered the apartments. The Wolfman had stopped right in front of them. They saw a man's face with two big red eyes, but a body hairy like a wolf. He saw just miles of dark farmland, and he gave up chase. My brother-in-law returned to their apartment. He encountered a resident who complained about a large dog hanging around their apartment. My brother-in-law used a flashlight to check the ground near the windows. A mixture of animal and human footprints were near the window that my sister first saw. My sister called my mother, who came out with cedar. She burned and blew it away, smoke and prayer. My mom had a ceremony done. A relative of ours started practicing witchcraft. This relative was stalking everyone. Those years were pretty unnerving. I was in Ohio at the time, and each noise I heard at night, I would think it was him stalking me. Long story about one ceremony done. This story happened to a member of our family, but on my father's side, his sister Vicky. That and her daughter Amy and husband Dan. They all live about an hour outside the county seat town where they reside. Amy and Dan lived on a farm in a less populated area, and Dan worked a regular day job. Amy worked nights as a nurse. They had 2 little children. After the move, Dan was killed in a traffic accident. Amy had the vehicle towed to the farm. It was placed in front of the house, but a ways from the front of the house. Trouble started during the wake and funeral for Dan. Both Aunt Vicky and Amy started seeing Dan sitting in the driver's seat at all times. Amy once walked up to the truck. When she got to the truck, it was empty. But yet, as my cousin walked to the truck, Aunt Vicky could still see Dan sitting in the truck. Amy found several white feathers during that week. When she walked to the truck to check to see if who or what was sitting in the truck, this feather was placed on the truck hood. The second feather was found as Amy walked into the funeral home to arrange services. The third and final feather was found at the dining room table the day of the funeral. Amy's house had weird happenings on the day of the funeral itself. The lower level door was closed but not locked, and it was locked when Aunt Vicky and Amy left the house. The front door was open and unlocked. The gun safe had marks, something trying to pry it open. Nothing was taken from it, the safe or the home. Condolence cards were scattered all over the floor off the dining room table, but the white feather was the only item on the table. They both stated that the condolence cards were stacked neatly on the table in piles, opened and unopened. Aunt Vicky called my mom to help. They were terrified to stay at that house. Amy couldn't understand why Dan would be terrorizing the family. My mom performed a ceremony to determine what was going on with the house or Dan. She sung her peyote songs, burned sage, and conversed with Dan. 1. First, my mother stated that someone was watching the house. Across from the house was a tree line of undeveloped property. A specific tree had a Y shape. This person had been smoking, eating, sitting undisguised. Food wrappers, piles of butts. After the ceremony, the hiding spot was revealed to be my aunt, mom, or cousin. The happenings of the funeral day was actual break-in. My mom told them the person was scared off and left in a hurry. He would not be back ever due to this ceremony. 3. The feathers were from Dan to Amy. He was expressing his love, caring, and saying goodbye. My mom told me what she did not tell my relatives. She saw why the burglar didn't finish the crime. The burglar went through the bottom level door. The man closed the door and went directly to the gun safe. This person had been able to get the keys to the door and used a bag of tools for the safe. As the burglar was working to get the safe open, Dan materialized. Dan scared the hell out of the burglar. The burglar was pushed physically out of the house, hence why the card was blown off the table. In the burglar's haste, he left the front door open, and to say a final goodbye to Amy, he left the third feather for her. The reason my mom said none of this to me or my aunt and cousin, or rather to me instead of my aunt and cousin. The burglar was their estranged son/brother. He was looking for some antique guns that he thought Amy and Dan possessed. The guns had been sold to my dead uncle prior to his passing. My mom turned the whole thing over to nature. Let nature exact justice. This male relative eventually lost everything in life, including his sanity. My mother's visitor. I have several experiences due to my mother's side of the family. My family is a mixture of Mississippi Choctaw and Dine or Dine. I don't know how to pronounce that. My apologies. During my childhood, I experienced the spiritual side of the Dine religion, medicine men, ceremonies, and living on the res. The females in our family have power. My mother is able to see and communicate with ghosts. She She's able to perform ceremonies that she learned from her parents. They were both medicine people. My parents met in a city far from their homes. They went BIA schools and earned degrees and certification for their respective careers. After graduation, they moved to a big city in Texas and got a house and started her family, otherwise known as me. Alrighty, here is my first story about my mom. Both of my parents worked. My dad worked for a big corporation on the outskirts of the city. My mother worked downtown for a private insurance company. She rode the bus line to get around. Went to a religious private school that provided after-school care. My mother one day at work got violently ill. Her boss was very worried about her, so he took her home. Our home was in a suburb which at the time was quiet. Didn't have a lot of natives in our neighborhood. My mom got home and called my dad and asked him to pick me up. Mom told my dad not to worry and came home as regular time. My mom had just decided to lay down in the living room, so she locked the house up. Since she didn't feel well, she didn't turn on the TV or the radio. She remembers drifting off and had blankets on her, her trusty Pendleton, a childhood blanket. Mom woke up with the start of an old lady dressed in formal clothing, a velveteen blouse and a print skirt that was emerald green. She wore her best jewelry squash blossom, 2 heavy bracelets and a long beaded earring, like silver and turquoise. The woman was dressed to the nines in her culture. She had her hair up and covered with a green kerchief. The woman had no face and she hovered over my mom. She had pulled up a dining room chair and sat down. The lady took her hand and reached for my mother's hand. She started to sing and chant the blessing way. My mother said she knew this voice, but it wasn't any of her large family. The old Dene lady's grip on my mother's hand was ice cold. My mother spoke Dene to her, asking her to let go. The lady said, "Not yet, not yet." Mama finally jerked her hand away. She got up and saw the chair empty by her. The front door was open, but the storm door locked. The remnants of corn pollen and cedar covered my mom's hair and around the couch. This woman knew my mom and was doing a healing, but no one except my father or boss knew she was sick. My grandmother went and placed stones, and it finally was revealed my mom's grandmother had done this. Along Mom story number 2. We moved into the home, redecorating, normal things. My husband worked swing shifts, and I worked day shift, weekends off. I was home alone at nighttime often. I started to notice weird knocking and sounds outside hitting the house. Seemed like a regular occurrence. Then one day the kitten stood straight on her back feet and growled, staring into the dining room. I got up, and as I walked into the room, those knocks and dings started up again. This room was the only room that the noises were present in. I decided to knock back if I heard it knock. A faint knock, a knock like it was coming from the basement. I knocked back hard. I was waiting and listening. I received a hard return knock in the dining room. I headed downstairs to the basement. Only items in the area was our washer and dryer and dirty clothes. Nothing scary or weird, but the knocks and pings coming from the dining room above. Now I was annoyed at this knocking. I went back to the dining room and knocked in a pattern. Once, then 3 times. Waited for an answer. This ghost knocked twice back, hard. My kitten Violet is now on the kitchen counter again, standing up on her back legs growling. Violet can see it clearly. I decided to leave the house to drive to my husband's job site and tell him what was going on. He promised to look around when he got home. The knocks happened while he was looking around. The knocks continued off and on, still didn't say anything to my mom. Then one evening we were home together watching a movie. We both dozed off. To me, it felt like my husband got off the couch. I opened my eyes and a man dressed in a gray sweatsuit stood before me. His head and hands were grayed out like old TV snow. I quickly closed my eyes and opened. He was still standing in front of me. The face had not filled in. I yelled my husband's name, and the figure vanished. My husband again checked the house. No sign of a man, knocks or pings. Made the call to my mom. They were planning to come out and explain to her what was going on at the house. Mom advised me to burn cedar and blow at the apparition. During that time waiting for them to arrive, I didn't stay at the house alone. Violet kept growling even though the other two cats were starting to growl and looking at the dining room. My parents arrived and my mom asked to sleep in the bedroom over the dining room. After the third night visiting, Mom said it was time. Mom announced after she performs the ceremony. Mom told us for 3 days after we will not speak about it. She started singing Dine Peyote songs and walking the property in all the rooms of our house. During the prayer portion, a large clanging noise emerged from the dining room. The ceremony was plain, simple, and lasted roughly about an hour. 3 days later, we asked my mother what was going on. Mom stated there were 2 separate ghosts. The first was a boy who frequented the left side of the property. Mom encountered him looking at the second-story bedroom. This was the bedroom over the dining room. The boy was pelting rocks at the window and walls. Mom asked the boy why. This young boy said that he wanted to talk to my friend. My mom said, "Your friend's gone." The previous owner of the house had 1 son. The young boy said he wanted to talk to him before he did, and by it, he meant that he was going to kill himself. Mom told the boy it was all over. That day can't be relived. The young boy didn't know that he was dead. Mom helped him to leave and go on to the light. This poor boy had been trapped repeating the sad day over and over. The knocks and dings and pings as him trying to get our attention, to find his friend, as he tried that fateful sad day. The second ghost. The apparition was a person who lived here. He meant no harm but loved the home dearly. Mom asked him not to appear like that. "You're scaring the hell out of my daughter." Mom advised me to just sort of talk out the terms of staying here with us. We spoke to him and stated happy to have you here, and we'll treat this house right. But to this day, it's worked out between us. After my parents left, I asked across the street neighbors about our west side next door neighbor. All this time we kept our distance from her. The window was always drunk, loud, generally scary. We didn't know anything about the suicide and what had transpired. 1 year before we moved in, their son, west side neighbor, committed suicide in their basement. The mother had found him. We now understood her behavior. After that, we've always been kind to her. You truly don't know why people drink or abuse drugs. Now we do. I asked about her previous owner's son, if he was close to the deceased boy. Aaron, our owner's son, had been a very close friend to the deceased boy. They had grown up together. And one added tidbit. A year from when my mom performed the ceremony, Aaron, the neighbor's son, was visiting other friends on the street. He came to our door and asked to look at the house, his old home. Aaron took us to each room and told us what upstairs his dad would appreciate. I asked Aaron which bedroom was his, and it was the one my mom spent the night in. Aaron looked out the window and talked about his childhood friend who used to pelt his window. Then, Aaron stated his father always regretted leaving the home. We didn't know the father had passed away shortly after selling the house. This was my first solo dealing with ghosts in a home, but we all, my husband, my father, and I, experienced the paranormal and the power. Girlfriend's father's experience in the 1990s. My girlfriend's dad went to school in Kansas, actually right around the corner of the Sally house. In the mid-1990s, he and his baseball buddies all got a new professor who they all loved. The University of Benedictine, Catholic University. and at the time they would provide a Victorian-era home for all the professors and their families to stay in for free of charge. However, the catch was that they would have to maintain the home and work on restoring it. Well, their new professor was living in the home, and the professor would frequently have him and his friends over to eat pizza, drink some beer, and watch some TV. Then, after about a month, they noticed the professor and his family began sleeping in his office. This, understandably, was very bizarre to them, so they asked them why they were doing this. The professor wouldn't provide an answer, so they just assumed something must be wrong with the house, tried to make sense of the situation the best they could. Then nearly a week later, the campus priest stopped him and his friends and said that he knew that they were friends of the professor, that they need to work on his lawn to help him out. He let the lawn go to shit when he left for his office. As they were working on his lawn, the professor and his wife showed up along with their daughter to get some more stuff, told them to leave. So they left and decided to kind of pool some money together for a hotel room in another town so they could work on his yard and fix up the house a little. But so the school would chill on him, and so the professor and his family could relax too. The professor didn't want to accept, but he did on one condition, that they wouldn't go upstairs at all. So him and his family left town for a bit. When the professor left, they fixed up the yard and painted some stuff in the house, and of course went upstairs as all the college kids would. They then decided to have some people over and drink at the professor's house because they said fuck it. Toward the end of the night, after the girls left, they heard a loud bang come from upstairs. They found a paint can they left up there was knocked down, but luckily the lid was on, so there wasn't a mess. But as they were taking the paint cans downstairs, they heard a noise from the little girl's room. Every toy was in a perfect circle, looking at one another. One of the guys picked up a beer and threw it across the room, and they all went back downstairs. They heard another bang, and all went up to find the beer back in its place. They pieced together that the bangs were the doors slamming shut. They then were getting freaked out, but they thought, oh, the ghosts and all that was bullshit. So this time they threw the toys around everywhere, till they all felt a burning sensation all over their bodies and their eyes. They all ran out of the house and their backs all had scratches. Their eyes were all turning bloodshot. They called the professor and told her what happened. He rejoiced that him and his family weren't crazy. It had happened to them too. That's why they fled the house. After that, the professor quit, and the university shortly thereafter tore the house down. My creepiest Ouija board experience. My freshman year of high school, my friends and I were really into playing with Ouija boards. I was always skeptical of whether or not they actually worked until this experience. My friends and I had gotten word that a few people at our school had started a paranormal club. I know it sounds stupid, but this was actually a thing in my high school. We were all pretty excited to hear about this since we were all into this type of stuff. A group of about 9 of us decided to go into the first meeting held after school one day. When we showed up to the room where the meeting was held, we were surprised to find that it was just us and a few others, as well as the 2 girls that had started the club, and the teacher chaperoning the meeting. One of the girls who started the club announced that for our first meeting, we were going to be watching an episode of Ghost Adventures, since it had some good paranormal encounters. My friends and I were pretty bummed that we were just watching a TV show. We expected to be doing something totally different. About 10 minutes into the episode, me and 4 of my other friends got bored. And since we were only 14 or 15 at the time, we couldn't leave until our parents picked us up. We decided to go hang out in one of our favorite teacher's rooms. His room was across the hall from the classroom paranormal club. We told the teacher that we were at the paranormal club across the hall, and we joined because we were into playing with Ouija boards. So my friend had the bright idea that we should play one in his room since, she knew how to make them. Our teacher was reluctant at first, but eventually just let us do it. My friend grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and scribbled down yes and no in the letters and numbers. We got a makeshift planchette. think we used like a quarter or something. We sat down at a table and started the game. We asked it, "Are you there?" And it slowly slid to yes. Then we asked, "What is your name?" It first slid to D, then O, then N, and we quickly slid to goodbye. Since this wasn't our first time coming in contact with a spirit named Don. So a little backstory. This Don spirit had come through on multiple occasions when my friend Megan would play the Ouija board. He would say he was one of her family members who had passed, but upon asking her parents if they had a deceased relative named Don, they assured her they didn't. So whenever Don came on the Ouija board, we knew just to slide to goodbye and not talk to him, since we thought he was bad news. Right as we told Don goodbye, the Paranormal Club leaders had burst into the classroom saying they'd been looking for us, asking why we were ditching their meeting. One of them walked closer to where we were sitting, saw the Ouija board. She started scolding us, telling us not to mess with Ouija boards because they're bad spirits. We assured her that we knew what we were doing, since we had done this so many times before. The girl sighed and let us get on with our game. She turned around to leave the room, but before she walked out, she told us about a girl who went to her high school back in the 90s or something. Said that she died nearby. She asked us when we were going to play the Ouija board if we could find out this girl's name. We agreed, and both girls left the room. I'd like to emphasize the fact that none of us knew this girl's name, let alone that there was a girl who died near the school. We thought it'd be pretty cool if we could find out her name, though, through the board, but didn't expect much. We then asked the Ouija board again, "Is anyone there?" It stalled for a minute, then slowly creeped to yes. I asked something along the lines of, "There was a student who died here. What was her name?" There was a long pause, and then the game piece started to move. It first slid to S, then A, then R, and then A, and then H. Sarah. We all froze for a moment. My friend Megan broke out the silence, and everything was just... Eventually, by asking the board what your name was, it spelled out Don. We all slid the planchette to goodbye as fast as we could. We then started joking about Megan's so-called relative Don and how he was always trying to mess with us. A few minutes passed, and the leader from the Paranormal Club came into our classroom again from across the hall. She said, "Hey guys, we did some research on the internet and we figured out the girl's name. It was Sarah." All of our jaws dropped. I immediately started getting goosebumps. And I'd like to remind you that none of us had any prior knowledge of this girl who passed away, since it happened almost 20 years prior. We told her that Sarah was the name that we got when we asked the Ouija board. She got excited and told me that me and my friends should follow her across the hall. We looked at the computer that she had been doing her research on, and sure enough, Sarah's obituary was pulled up on the screen. She was struck by a car while attempting to cross the main road. The girl also said, and this chilled me to my core, that she found another obituary for a janitor who worked at my high school in the 90s and committed suicide. His name, Don. Too regular not to worry about. I was haunted in the past by a little girl. She beat me in my sleep. She's gone now, and for years, that was it, no harm done. If you say so. Recently, it could be the past couple years. Every so often I'd be torn out of a deep sleep, straight out of it. My attention would always be like at this one part of the room. More often than not, there'd be a figure there. My most recent post was about the last one I saw. The figures used to have no physical distinguishable traits. They were a black shrouded mass. When I'd wake up and see them, they'd quickly disappear, and that was that. But they've been getting gradually clearer, becoming more defined, and they're not the same spirit each time. They've been getting closer too, and taking longer to disappear. This one, only a few minutes before writing this, is at 2:57 a.m. It tore me out of a deep sleep and was a stride length away from the end of my bed. I woke up, saw it in its black robes and its arms hidden like a monk when you put their hands into each robe. Its face was white and twisted into a smile. It was 8 feet tall and it was staring directly at me. I moved toward my lamp and its face followed me, clearly watching me. Only when I reached for the lamp and it realized what I was doing, it took a quick step back, then it disappeared when the light came on. I've never been worried about these before, but the past 2 have been the clearest. This is the first one to actually move away from me when I reach for the light. Something is clearly waking me up before they get to me, but the fact that they're getting clearer, closer, and able to move is really fucking with me. Ghost Girl. So a good few years ago, I'd say maybe 7 years ago, when I was 18, my dad got me a World War II air raid siren for Christmas. It was seriously cool and I took it outside immediately to give it a go. It made the typical eerie air raid siren sound. I loved it. Now, nothing happened for a long time, but then I started feeling as if I was being watched, usually at night. Then one Friday, I was gaming with my friends on Xbox Live, and in the middle of the game, I saw someone standing to my right, next to the air raid siren. I turned to look, and there's this little girl in a white nightdress and long black hair facing away from me, and toward the door I was speechless. She was completely solid like a real person. I could even see her shoulders rise and fall as she breathed. Yet she said and did nothing. She just stood there for the whole time she was there, couldn't look away, couldn't talk or anything. Then when she was gone, I returned to the Xbox chat and told my friends what I saw, and we joked. I felt creeped out, but nothing else. Now this happened several more times. Each time she appeared, I couldn't do anything except stare at her. My friend said to film her and shout at her, but I just couldn't. And this was happening at random times throughout the day. Once was midday, and each time I saw her, she was facing away from me. I never saw her face, but she was always getting closer to my bed. One time, there was a woman standing with her, but she was also facing away from me and toward the door. None of my family paid any attention to me about it until I started waking up with nosebleeds. I woke up with nosebleeds, black eyes, and bruises all over my body. I looked like I'd partaken in Fight Club. I was getting these beatings like nightly. On one occasion, my sister and her boyfriend heard a girl giggling and ran across the bedroom. It was the only time the ghost girl seemed to visit any of my family. Now, because of the beatings, my mom contemplated getting a priest in to bless the air raid siren in hopes of putting an end to it. My dad did some research. According to where the air raid siren's been stationed back in the day and kept, no one had died near it or become attached to it. I never told my girlfriend at the time about the ghost girl because I knew she'd never come around. So one night we're curled up in my bed. It's a single bed. She's by the wall and I'm on the edge. And as I'm nearly falling off, I tell her to move over. And stupid old me, I said the wrong girl's name. As I'm sure you can all understand, if your partner said the wrong name, you wouldn't be too happy. So she rolls over to have a go at me and immediately turns back around and starts sobbing into the bed, refusing to look back toward me. Get up, turn on the light, ask her why she's crying. She's thinking it's because I said the wrong name, or I was thinking that, but that's when she finally and slowly looks up, and she was as pale as snow, staring past me, the edge of the bed. This is when she told me that when she turned over toward me, there was a little girl in a white nightdress and long black hair standing directly behind me, staring down at her. I freaked the fuck out. After that night, moved the air raid siren into the barn, and immediately I could feel her presence gone from my room and the house. It was as if she couldn't get in. Whenever I go out into the barn, I can feel her there. Sometimes I see her standing near the siren, and I can feel her outside my bedroom window now and again. But still can't get in and still can't hurt me. Complete silence in the mountains. Sounds nice. About 3 years ago, I went hiking in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Since I didn't speak Arabic and my phone didn't receive data in Morocco, I decided to hire a guide. He suggested that we hike Jebel Yagur. It was a smaller mountain, but I was told that it had an excellent view. About a quarter way up the journey, I suddenly couldn't hear anything. I thought I was about to pass out, and I sat down quickly. As I sat there, I realized I wasn't lightheaded. My vision was perfectly fine, and I began to stand back up. I took a step forward, but I couldn't hear my foot hit the rocky ground beneath it. I took another step forward, and then once again I could hear everything. I could hear my guide call out to me and ask if I was okay. I could hear the wind again, and I could hear the voices of other people further up the mountain. I turned around, stepped back where I was standing a moment prior, and again I heard nothing. I slammed my foot into the ground trying to make a sound, but I still heard nothing. I even picked up a small rock and threw it downward, and still nothing. I eventually stepped forward again and called my guide to come to me. I asked him to stand where I was a moment ago. He looked at me weird, but he stood there, and I saw his eyes get wide. He took 2 steps forward very quickly and asked what just happened. I told him I hoped he'd know. He had no idea. He seemed really spooked, and even more so than me, and suggested we keep hiking. On the way up the mountain, we talked about how weird our experience was, and I decided to try to find the same spot on the way down. Once we reached the top and hiked back down, I was just standing in the same spot as earlier. The problem was that the spot looked like every other part of the mountain surrounding it. I spent about 30 minutes looking for the spot, but I couldn't find it. I know it's a long shot, but has anyone ever experienced something similar? And even better, has anybody experienced this at this place?